Hi, everyone. It's another episode of Masks Off with Tia.
And I'm Kim.
And today we're talking about suffering. And read the quote first, and then we'll talk about it. So this quote is from the Dalai Lama, and I'm sure several of you have already heard it, but here it's just a really good go-to quote. Pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And the reason we wanted to talk about suffering today is because there's so much going on right now. I don't know if you're experiencing suffering in your life or you are noticing other people suffering. And we kind of were talking before we hit record about how it's showing up in our lives, how it's showing up collectively, and felt it was an important one to discuss, especially, as the quote says, it's optional. And it may not feel that way, especially right now.
That's a hard one for people to take.
Yeah, and we're in this middle of so much uncertainty, so much ease and of blaming the other, so much divisiveness.
Yeah.
In the
And
country.
we're conditioned to resist. We're
Right.
conditioned for resistance,
Mm-hmm.
to blame. So
Right.
hard to take 100% responsibility, because that's what this quote is saying.
Exactly.
Pain will be there always.
Mm-hmm.
Life will always have pain, but whether you suffer or not is 100% up to you.
Right.
Take 100% responsibility.
Exactly. And it doesn't
That's
feel
hard.
like that a lot of times.
It doesn't.
Especially right now with, so it's what, July 23rd that we're recording this. So we're, winding down summer, moving into school and fall, and people are overwhelmed, and corona numbers are not going down, they're going up. And so we don't know what school is going to look like, college is going to look like, work's going to look like. And so people are fed up. I'm hearing that a lot. People don't want to wear masks. They're creating conspiracy theories, whether or not any of those are true. I don't know. That's not what we're here to talk about, but are those theories, is how school is laying out, are we in acceptance or in resistance? Because when we're resisting reality, doesn't mean we don't stop critical thinking and just giving up, but this is what it is. And when we're resisting, we go into blaming the other or blaming ourselves, and then we're creating that suffering. And then we're not moving forward with responding. We're reacting.
Yes.
And we're stuck in that spiral we were talking about before we hit record. There's that spiral that people get stuck and can't get out very easily.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking what's coming up for me is one area where I, really do get stuck is and create more suffering for myself and I've gotten a lot better with it because I've worked on it, is the mistakes that I made as a parent.
Oh, yes. And I don't know what it's like for you, but I look back before conscious parenting.
Yes, that's
and
it.
I see how it's manifested.
Yes.
Today. And not saying it's just our parenting at the time, because obviously there's cultural and all sorts of other things, teachers, school, just media, whatever, influenced it. So it's not just us, right?
Yes.
And we still made choices that I wish I had done differently.
Same for me.
And knowing, how it's showing up. And it's really rough, especially now with all this uncertainty in the world too. It seems like it's just like in your face.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So same thing as I see, my kids struggling now currently, I will say to myself, oh, if I had done blah, blah, blah differently. And again, I've come a long way. So I don't really, here's the thing. I don't allow myself to go too far down the rabbit hole with it. I used to really go down the rabbit hole, right? So again, we talked about this before about conscious parenting is when about 8 years ago, when I started to first realize, how to be a different kind of parent and to wake myself up. So, things have gotten better since, but I've spent times just feeling, I don't even know if I would say guilt, but it really probably was more shame, right?
Oh yeah, definitely shame. It's not guilt.
It's shame.
I think it's actually shame.
Because guilt is right. And we talked about the difference between guilt and shame, just to reiterate that guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad.
Right.
And guilt is often, if you do something bad, then you can take that and you can move in a different direction and learn from it.
Exactly.
Whereas
because you're on the behavior,
you're on the behavior, not as the person.
As a human, right?
Yes. And I kept feeling like I am a bad mom.
Yeah.
And as I had those thoughts, it just created those feelings inside of me of I'm not good enough.
Right.
And I quote unquote, I would say to myself over and over, I effed up my kids, right? And the other thing about doing that now, so, okay, yes, it's painful that it happened. So we're talking about pain is inevitable and suffering is optional.
Yep.
So yes, it happened. And by continuing to allow myself to feel that shame is just continuing the suffering. And the fact is it's in the past anyway.
Right. Right. And I think
can't go back and change the past.
No. And and especially
so why go there?
And especially in the present moment right now, when we're thinking about what we did 15, 16, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
It's so far in the past.
So far.
And not that, I shamed myself a week or two ago. I won't go into the details, but it was a mom moment. And I'm just I'm the worst mom in the world. I know better. And I got stuck there. But like you said, I don't stay there anymore. So we can hit that shame point, but then we make a choice to not continue the suffering and be like, you know what? I'm human.
Exactly.
I screw up. But when we go back even further, knowing, especially knowing how the brain developed and those formative years and all of that, it is still tough.
It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow because for me as a mom, I just want to make sure, I just want everything to just be perfect for them. I want everything to be perfect. I don't want them to have any pain. I want to just erase all the pain. I literally want to take an eraser and erase the whiteboard of everything I did. Can't I just go do that, please?
Can we just take the blue pill or whatever it is and erase all that? Erase the memories I don't want to have anymore.
Yes, exactly.
Take it away. A redo. But we're doing redos all the time. And that's what we have to remember, that moving forward today, we still screw up and we still can see how things have co-created over the years.
Yes.
But we can come with more presence and more accepting and suffer less.
Yeah, exactly.
And remembering that we only control ourselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough.
That one's a tough one. And the thing is, in terms of how that suffering part is optional. So we all have had the same experience. Our parents were unaware of what they were doing when they raised us, and generations back. So I've had the same imprints on me that I've put on my kids. But here's the difference. I am taking action. I have been taking action over the last several years, 15, 20 years, to go inward and to heal those parts of me that were, those inner child wounds that were a part of me because of my upbringing. And so as a result of doing that, the memory may still be there, but the energy now is gone. the energy is not there anymore, and it doesn't keep playing out or wreaking havoc in my life the way that it used to.
Right.
Because why? Because I did the work. So that's why the part of the quote that suffering is optional is because I was thinking about this the other day. It was blowing my mind. I think it was just yesterday. I was driving and realizing how much more I can see the color of trees, how much more I notice flowers,
wow.
how much more I'm present and, in the present,
Right.
and how much more joy. And like, while I can still have the memories of the pain that I used to have before, it's not like it's not always lingering. It's not always there. It's like in
Yes.
the distant past now. So
Mhm.
there's the shift. There's the part that
Wow.
has changed and the growth that I've had. And that's what's on the other side of doing this work. And that's why, again, I repeat myself by saying that the suffering is optional.
Yeah. And I think another piece that we talked about before we hit record is we didn't even know we were suffering
Yes.
when we're in that. And because until we know what this inner work can do and how it can shift, like you said, you see the trees differently, you see the flowers differently. You don't even know that you're stuck in this continuous cycle of suffering because that's normal. Those thoughts
Right. It's familiar.
normal. It's familiar. That's a better word but it is kind of normal in the world we live in for the most part.
I know. It's the norm.
Yeah. It's what we know. It's what we were experiencing over and over and over and didn't even know there was another option to not
Absolutely.
suffer, and that accepting and not resisting. And yeah, I didn't even know I was in it.
I know.
I had
I know. Can
no
you think of
idea.
an example of where either you or a client maybe, gets caught in the suffering or the suffering part?
I mean, let me see if I can think of a specific example, but just a general example. So when my kids were probably 7, 8, when they really start to have more autonomy, I mean, you see it. I didn't have really a big issue with toddlerhood. I think I just mentally it was that intellectual part of my brain, like they're supposed to have temper tantrums. It's not a big deal. It's not personal. It's just, I was really able to stay in that space. But for me, it got tougher in the elementary years. It was much more, maybe it's because they had the words to express it in a different way. I don't know what it was. But I kept continuing the suffering of, they don't love me, they're pushing me away, when in reality they weren't. So I was continuing the suffering of, poor me, I'm not a good enough mom. If they loved me, they wouldn't push me away. Or if I was a good mom, they wouldn't push me away and tell me that, no, I can do it myself, or I'm going to go out and do that. I was looking for reasons to continue the story of, I'm not a good enough mom.
Yep.
Even though that really wasn't the case at all. So like when they would fight, when they'd have sibling fights, it was because I wasn't a good enough mom. That was a common one for me, because I could not handle when they would have a fight.
It was always your fault.
And it wasn't 99% of the time, but
you
it
thought
was
so.
my fault that if I was a good enough mother, they would have the sibling relationship that you see in movies and on TV shows.
That comparison that we
Oh
talked
my
about
gosh.
before.
Yeah. And I, being an only child, not understanding what a sibling relationship was, just amplified it, because I didn't have any personal experience that siblings just fight.
Yeah.
And that's how they learn how to fight. And that's how they learn how to communicate and deal with conflict. But it was because I had created in my mind, I was not a good enough mother to create kids who loved each other every second of the day and never said a bad word to each other. So it was really more their interactions was tougher for me than the interactions, now that I think about it, with me per se.
And what I love what you're saying in that example is you're talking about projection, and you're talking about the stories that we create. And both of those are huge, huge proponents of causing suffering. Right. Because we make these projections in our mind, and we make up these stories in our mind that maybe are the furthest thing from the truth.
Oh yeah.
And look how much suffering it causes. Look how much suffering caused you in that example.
And my suffering, and that's where that conscious parenting piece comes in, bled over onto my children, right? Because
How
conscious
so?
parenting is about us.
Yeah.
Not about the behavior of our kids. Well, just because it was like, why can't you stop fighting? Why are you saying this? You know, I don't remember the words I used specifically, but then it was, you know, I wanted to stop the fighting. So I would get over involved, which then they're not good enough to handle their own conflict. So that created, even though they perfectly well were, and being my kids that are amazing told me to back off even at a young age. Like, we can handle this. It doesn't involve you, Mom. But I kept trying to interject myself, which just, so my suffering was bleeding onto them.
Wow.
Unintentionally. Not realizing it. Now, I mean, it's clear as day.
Yeah. You're
like
able
what
to
you were
see it
talking
now.
about, like, oh, if only.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's in the past.
It is. It's so, you can't change it, right? Because it's over with. And I think what I've heard both of us saying in this conversation so far is we are talking a lot about the first arrow and the second arrow, which we're going to do in our next episode. So we thought we would just do like a little quick episode just to talk about suffering and pain, and the fact that pain is always going to be a part of life. There's no getting around that, right? There's always going to be pain. You're going to lose someone, you know, there's going to be hardship. There's things that just happen.
And you can't take that eraser
and you can't take the eraser because that's just that's suffering. Me with exactly. Or my magic wand, right? I just want to make everything better and make everything go away. You know, that's resisting. Resist. Yes. And it just shoves it down, and that causes even more suffering, because then it causes a looping of, okay, now I'm in resistance. And then the behavior that come out of that, you know, whatever, to deal with that, those feelings. So we're going to talk a lot more about the first arrow and second arrow in the next episode, but we just wanted to plant some seeds, lay some groundwork just in this episode on talking about why we suffer. And so stay tuned. Make sure you listen to the next one.
That's right.
And, you know, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment. I think maybe too, we could also ask our viewers and listeners, whether they're on YouTube or a podcast, if they have any ideas on what they want us to talk about.
Oh, I'd love that.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. Send us an email or a comment.
Yeah.
However it works based on whatever platform you're doing. But in the show notes, we have our Masks Off email. I think it's podcastmasksoff@gmail.com.
@gmail.com.
I think that's what it is.
So there's a number of ways to let us know, but if there's a topic or an area or something you've been wondering about and you want us to talk about it in an episode, we would love to hear from you.
Definitely.
So as always, thank you so much. We appreciate the support and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Make sure you stay tuned in.
First arrow, second arrow.
Coming up.
Bye.
Bye.